Welcome back. We are on chapter 2 of The Girls Who Went Away by Ann Fessler. Just to remind you guys, I am breaking these down a little bit because of the way that the book is broken down. You can check out chapter 1, which was called My Own Story as Told by an Adoptee, which is Anne's personal story. You can also check out our other readings from other books. Anyway, let's get started. You asked me why I agreed to interview. Sorry, let's reread that. You asked me why I agreed to be interviewed, and I think it was because you were here, because you came here. It spoke to me, that's all. There's still that voice in me that says, who would be interested? No one cared then. Why would they care now? I was abandoned when it was right in everyone's face. So I still believe that nobody cares. My personal struggle is to get beyond thinking I'm not worth caring about. I am here. I do exist. Maybe by adding my 2 cents, I can help other moms who feel the way I do. Maybe they will find someone who cares. Suzanne. In June of 2002, I began tape recording the oral histories of women who surrendered a newborn for adoption between the end of World War II in 1945 and the 1973 passage of Roe v. Wade, which legalized abortion throughout the nation, which, as we know of, has been overturned at this point, which is ridiculous, but anyway. These years were a time of enormous change for young women as barriers to equality and independence broke down. For the young men and women growing up in post-war years, especially those of the baby boom generation, this liberation from the past also applied to sexual behavior. And though premarital sex was certainly not a new phenomenon, it became increasingly common among those who had no plans to marry. For women born after 1949, the odds were that they would have sex before they reached age 20. Despite the increase in the number of young people having sex in the 1950s and 60s, access to birth control and sex education lagged far behind. Fearing that sex education would promote and encourage sexual relations, parents and schools thought it best to leave young people uninformed. Ugh, this is still happening today. You would think that, we would have figured this out by now, but no, especially in southern states, and it's so frustrating because we have seen that when it comes to sex education, there's been stats that prove that when there's more sex education and more access to it, the rate of teen births goes down. Anyway. Let's continue on. During this time, effective birth control was difficult to obtain. Still is. In fact, in some states, it was illegal to sell contraceptives to those who were unmarried. Sounds like that's going to be happening soon again, right? The efforts to restrict information and access to birth control did not prevent teens from having sex, however. The result was an explosion in premarital pregnancy and in the numbers of babies surrendered for adoption. Though sexual norms were changing among the young, the shame associated with single pregnancy remained. The social stigma of being an unwed mother was so great that many families, especially middle-class families, felt it was simply unthinkable to have a daughter keep an illegitimate child. These women either married quickly or were sent away before their pregnancy could be detected by others in the community. Between 1945 and 1973, 1.5 million babies were relinquished for non-family or unrelated adoptions. I've tried to explain to my kids that it wasn't like it is today. Nobody knew that much about birth control. What used to bother me a lot was I knew a lot of girls who were having sex. They just weren't caught. If you were caught, somehow you were different. And you needed to be horrified and shamed. I was thinking, but everybody's doing it. Why am I a bad person now? It was just totally different. You didn't keep your child. You didn't. I knew one girl who got married and immediately divorced afterward. At least that would keep the people who talk at bay. Lorinda. Just about everyone who lived through this era has a memory of a girl from high school, college, or in the neighborhood who disappeared. If she returned, she most likely did not come back with her baby, but with a story of a sick aunt or an illness that had kept her out of school. If her peers doubted her story, they probably did not challenge her directly. They simply distanced themselves. According to the prevailing double standard, the young man who was equally responsible for the pregnancy was not condemned for his actions. It was her fault, not their fault, that she got pregnant. This was in the period of time when there wasn't much worse that a girl could do. They almost treated you like you had committed murder or something. Tony. The girls who went away were told by family members, social service agencies, and clergy that relinquishing their child for adoption was the only acceptable option. It would preserve their reputation and save both mother and child from a lifetime of shame. Often, it was clear to everyone except the expectant mother that adoption was the answer. So let's pause there. Except that adoption is shame, right? So oftentimes when this was happening, you're not only shaming the mother, you're shaming the child because their life is hidden, their birth is hidden. They're not just from the birth family, but from in the adoptive family. Often they weren't told that they were adopted, which is a whole identity crisis. Anyway, often it was clear to everyone. Oh, sorry, we were just there. All right, here we go. Many of these girls, even those in their 20s, had no other option than to go along with their families or risk being permanently ostracized. For them, there was generally little or no discussion before their parents sent them away. Those who went to maternity homes to wait out their pregnancies often received little counseling and were totally unprepared for either childbirth or relinquishment. They were simply told they must surrender their child, keep their secret, move on, and forget. Though moving on and forgetting proved impossible, many women were shamed into keeping their secret. As soon as the time was near, we were going to do this interview, all these physical things started to happen. My jaw doesn't want to open, and my lungs were all tight. I thought, I wonder why I can't open my mouth. Then I realized I'm supposed to be silent. I'm not supposed to tell the secret. The story. The secrecy has dominated everything. It's so powerful and pervasive, and the longer you keep a secret, the more power it takes on. Diane 4. I've never really felt like I could talk to anybody about it. You know, a society that has this picture, you hear about people giving their babies away. The whole terminology is so misleading. I didn't give him away. I think one of the reasons I don't talk to some people about it is because they are so judgmental. Quite frankly, it's not that society can't understand. It's that they won't understand. People choose to not understand. Carol, too. Yeah, that's true. Even in today's world, they choose not to understand. They choose not to listen. They choose to have this rainbows and butterflies and that everything is so beautiful outlook when it's really not. They just think, well, it's a win-win situation, but it's really not. It's a lose-lose situation in most cases. So anyway, afterward, I never told unless it was somebody I was very, very close to. I never opened up to anyone unless I felt that they would accept me. I felt like I lived a lie because people didn't really know me. I was afraid that people would not accept me if they knew the truth. It was something that I carried with me for 36 years. Carol 1. The secrecy has, in part, allowed for some of the old myths about women who surrendered babies to survive. One assumption was that they were women who were having a lot of sex with different young men. In fact, a majority of the women I interviewed became pregnant with their first sexual partner, some from their first sexual experience. I'm being very honest with you by saying I was a very late bloomer. When I got pregnant, it was the very first time I had ever had sex. Very first time. I'm sure I probably didn't even like it. I went all through high school and never had it. My parents' generation, the greatest generation, thought it didn't happen to nice girls. You just have to know that that's what society and parents felt. Nice girls didn't get pregnant, but nice girls do get pregnant. And nice girls get pregnant now. People saw us as loose women. Well, I wasn't a loose woman. It wasn't that way for me. I didn't sleep around. But that's the label. That is absolutely the label. Oh well, I could be called worse things. I could be called a liar. I could be called a cheat. Kathy, too. Another prevailing myth is that these women were all eager to surrender their child and be free of their problem. The assumption that these babies were unwanted by their mothers is ubiquitous. Pausing there, this is still seems to be the term that, oh, well, you were unwanted, or, oh, they would have thrown you in a dumpster, or you wouldn't have had a good life, or they, were drug addicts or alcoholics or something like that, is so not just very wrong in terms of information, but it's so harmful to us as adoptees. Anyway, the act of relinquishment seemed to confirm this, since it is commonly believed to be a personal decision by the mother based on her lack of interest or desire to parent. A decision that is independent of social, family, and economic pressures. This misguided and simplistic notion has been harmful not only to the mothers, but also many adoptees who believe they were thrown away. So like I just said, 99% of birth mothers wanted their children and wanted a parent. 95% of the cases was a temporary situation. Had they had the support and resources to parent, they would have. In the 5% of cases where external care was necessary, it would have been long-term. 4% due to, again, possibly drugs or alcohol or domestic abuse. That doesn't mean they don't want to parent. It's just they weren't in that situation to be able to. But like we've talked about, is there's other options beyond adoption. But again, and even today, adoption is pushed for many reasons from this societal point of view, and it's problematic. Anyway, moving on. Over the years, I had many conversations with adult adoptees who say, "She didn't want me. Why should I want to know her?" They clearly have no idea how infinitely more complicated their mother's circumstances were, and a short conversation could not possibly explain it. This book is partly a response to their comments. It is a story best told by the mothers themselves, and best understood within the context of the time period. Chances are the baby wasn't unwanted. It was a baby unwanted by society, not by mom. You couldn't be an unwed mother. Motherhood was synonymous with marriage. If you weren't married, your child was a bastard, and those terms were used. I think I'm like many other women who thought, it may kill me to do this, but my baby is going to have what everybody keeps saying is best for him. It's not because the child wasn't wanted. There would have been nothing more wonderful to come home with my baby, Glory. Nobody ever asked me if I wanted to keep the baby or explain the options. I went to the maternity home. I was going to have the baby. They were going to take it, and I was going home. I was not allowed to keep the baby. I would have been disowned. I don't even know if they had programs to help women and children back then. I don't know what was available. I was made to feel very ashamed of the situation that I had created for myself and for my mother and for my family and friends. So I felt all those avenues were closed. I guess maybe I had to convince myself that I didn't give him away. I gave him away to have two parents, a way to have a home. Maybe that's a cop-out on my part. I don't know. But that's the only way I can live with it. Joyce 1. I never felt like I gave my baby away. I always felt like my daughter was taken from me. Polly. Yet another myth in common currency is that these women did move on and forget. In truth, none of the mothers I interviewed were able to forget. Rather, they describe the surrender of their child as the most significant and defining event of their lives. Given the enormous number of women involved and the impact the surrender had on their lives, not to mention the lives of their parents, their subsequent partners and children, the father of their babies, and the surrendered children, it is remarkable that so little is known about these mothers' experiences, even now, decades later. This silence has also kept many of these women from learning about one another and understanding that their feelings of loss were normal and consistent with thousands of other mothers who had surrendered children. So, if you guys are on TikTok, there are many birth mothers who are speaking out. There have been groups by adoption agencies, usually it's within the first year of the relinquishment, and they don't truly accept birth mothers who have relinquished after that because they tell you the truth and the regret and all of this. But it's a huge problem that they're lied to, even today. And so a lot of people from all parts of the triad. So adoptees and birth mothers and adoptive parents, although not as many, are speaking out about the issues and trying to change the laws and the societal norms. But it's still happening today. And again, with the overturn of Roe versus Wade by our Supreme Court is problematic, to say the least. Oh, excuse me. No, that's not to say that there aren't a ton of single moms out there, because it is. That's also not to say that we aren't still shamed if we're unwed. But it's definitely gotten better when it comes to options and being told information, and with the access to the internet. So there are some bonuses, but it's definitely not enough. Anyway, moving on. I am shocked at how much it has impacted my life. I really tried to move on and forget. I tried to do what they said, but it didn't work. I was convinced that there was something wrong with me. There must be something wrong with me. It was supposed to work. Everybody said so, but it didn't. No matter how many degrees I got, how many credits I had, how many years I worked, I was empty. Glory. The surrender was the beginning of a long cycle that colored my entire life. Your identity is formed in your teen years. And if you take on this identity of a worthless, horrible, guilty person, then that's going to affect you your whole life. Guilt was always such a pervasive part of me. Not that I was sexual, or not that I was pregnant, but that I felt I let somebody take my child. That's the guilt. People talk about the worst thing that could happen to you is to lose a child. That's true. And no one talks about that in terms of a birth mother. What do they think that is for her? Why would it be any different? It's in your cells and in your gut and in your own conscious and in your heart. Diane 4. So that's true. I feel like I've discussed this so many times. People recognize the loss of a child when it comes to death, or the loss of a parent when it comes to that, but they don't when it comes to adoption, and it's extremely harmful. Anyway, as I listened to story after story, what impressed me so powerfully was the commonalities in the women's experiences. How the surrender was not a deeply personal experience that affected the life of each woman, but also a profound collective experience. Taken together, these experiences offer evidence of the lack of individual choice and the pervasiveness of surrender as a social phenomenon. For most of the women I interviewed, it was not a question of choice, but of doing what society demanded, a demand that society has never fully acknowledged. It was such a long time ago, and I started thinking, just let it go. Just let it go and move on. Yet I couldn't. I can't. It's a big issue to those who lived it. There are women out there who lost their firstborn child and never get to grieve. I can't even put it into words. It's a weird thing. This whole adoption thing where people think that someone could just hand their child over and it will be okay. Obviously, it's not. We're still alive. We're still here. We haven't died. Our issues are every day. We live this every day. Every day. Suzanne. All right, guys, that is the end of this part of chapter 2. The next 2 parts will be personal stories by birth mothers, so stay tuned, and I will see you guys next time.